Today, on this Remembrance Sunday, as on every Remembrance Sunday, we come together to remember those who have died and those who have fought in wars, those who mourn the death of their loved ones, and those whose lives have been irreversibly changed by the experiences they've had of war. We come together to bewail the destruction and the pain caused by our inhumanity to one another. We seek to promote peace. We commit never to forget. We endeavour to honour the lives of those who died and to learn from the past, such that we never repeat the tragic bloodshed which the world witnessed. As I was preparing to preach this week, I started gathering my thoughts together, and it struck me that the things that I was about to say were exactly the same things that I'd said last year, and exactly the same things that I'd said the year before. And those things which I've just mentioned, our remembrance, our bewailing the destruction, our committing ourselves to peace, our seeking for a future in which the generations to come never have to face the same devastation that we've seen. I think those are things about which we're more or less in universal agreement. My sense is that there's a great sense of public agreement about war. It might be partly to do with my experience of only having lived through one large conflict, the war in Iraq, and the fact that that conflict was so universally denounced from the very beginning. It might be because of all the people who denounced that, the polls show that 18 to 24-year-olds, 90% or more of those denounced it. So it might be something to do with my generation as well. But I feel like there is one mind in our nation, and that each year I come and say these same things: our seeking for peace, the horror of war that we never want to see committed again, the honouring of the lives of those who went and fought and those who died. And so I thought I would look back today to see what kind of things the church was preaching before the First World War, to maybe give myself some insight into why we come and do this year upon year upon year. And I'm thankful to a certain chap called Kevin Fielden, who did the research such that I could just steal it and deliver it to you today. So Anglo-German relations at the beginning of the last century were becoming sufficiently strained that ecumenical groups in England and in Germany set up a cross-nation institution with the not-so-snappy title, the Associated Councils of the Churches of British and German Empires for the Fostering of Friendly Relations between the two peoples. Our very own Archbishop at the time, Archbishop Davidson, he thought this was an awful lot of bother having to welcome German Christians, and when it was suggested that he make a return trip to Germany for a week the next year, he really thought that this was quite unnecessary and absolute waste of time. Because he said that he thought a war between the two greatest Protestant nations of Europe was virtually unimaginable. Well, despite this somewhat half-hearted attempt, the Church of England did in 1911 establish the Church of England Peace League. And I quote from their founding documents: "War is the result of people's failure to appropriate the gospel. Therefore, the Church's task is to make the gospel heard in the corridors of power as well as in the parishes." They believed that war was a result of people not understanding and acting upon the gospel. And that wasn't unique to a particular group of pacifist-inclined Christians within the Church of England. Documents from the published on behalf of the whole church at the time, read, "It was an evil scourge," speaking of war, "it was an evil scourge against which rational people armed with the ethics of the New Testament have to fight with the sword of the Spirit." And that same document goes on to say, "Rational Christian men should settle their differences through arbitration. War signifies the triumph of unreason and evil in the world." It was against this backdrop of Christian pacifism and of our Archbishop thinking that these bonds of friendship were not even worth the time of undertaking because war was so unlikely, that the First World War broke out. And that perhaps is a good reminder and a warning to us as to why year in and year out we continue to repeat the same message, that war is a tragedy and it's not glorious, and that we must do all in our power to seek peace. So that's something old that I tell you every year, and maybe this is something new. Alongside the remembrance and the honouring of those who have died, we also remember those who have returned. And as a nation, I think probably our ex-service personnel have been becoming more forward in our thoughts over the last possibly 20 years, in part because of the death of the last of the First World War veterans, the last of the veterans of the trenches, culminating in the rather charismatic Harry Patch. I suspect that at this time of year they probably replay the documentary about him and his life. If they do, and if you see it, do take a chance to watch it. You can catch it on, the whole thing's on YouTube as well. He was an amazing man, 114 or something, when he died just a few years ago. Also the work of Help for Heroes and the work of the Invictus Games, launched by Prince Harry, remind us of our responsibility of care for injured veterans, and the campaigns that are run by the Royal British Legion. I was quite surprised looking at some of their research on some of their figures. There are over 6 million ex-service personnel in the United Kingdom. I would never have guessed that many. Now that number is decreasing because many of those people, much of that figure is made up of the surviving veterans of the Second World War who are gradually now dying of old age. And important work has been done in gathering together their stories, but I suspect many of us can think of members of our own families or people that we knew, neighbours, who had lives in the war, but who never spoke about them. My grandfather was one. He was a rear gunner in a bomber, and that's as much as I ever knew of what he did, and he never spoke a word of it, and we were strictly ordered to never ask a word about it either. Well, I've collected together some testimonies from some anonymous veterans to inform our reflections today. These are predominantly veterans of more recent conflicts, and they're those who have courageously shared their stories so that we might be able to gain some small insight. Here's what one soldier said. "It's an entirely different universe. You spend so much time preparing to go to war and go through so many drills to really make sure you know how to react to anything, from a lone sniper to a complex ambush with explosives and an enemy squad. And when I actually had to use the things we'd practiced, it was second nature. I wasn't thinking that the person I'm shooting may have a family, or that they're firing a pot shot just to earn money. I wasn't thinking about whether or not I was dying. To me, it was just shooting back. But they never trained you on the downtime. You were always prepared for something, hyper-vigilant. It's been years since I came back, but I feel like I'm still ready to fight at a moment's notice. Relaxing is hard. They didn't teach us how to readjust to a non-combat environment. Here's what another soldier wrote. It's been 5 years. The only place I sit down is in a car. I've never sat on the couch in my own living room. We bought it 3 years ago. If I'm not asleep, I'm either driving, standing, or taking a knee. About 3 years ago, I almost drove my wife and son off the road because a cardboard box was sitting between the 2 lanes, so the ditch looked safer. Another veteran writes, I almost never go into restaurants and eat. I feel like a sitting duck. I'll call ahead to a nice place, get an expensive meal, and take it home, or literally stand in the car park and eat a £30 dinner off the boot of my car. And finally, another soldier writes, we were having a family barbecue, and my brother accidentally burnt a batch of chicken. They started talking about how much it smells like human flesh burning. I said, it doesn't smell like human flesh burning at all. After those testimonies, it will probably not surprise you to hear that veterans aged between 16 and 64 are twice as likely as the general population to report suffering from long-term illness, twice as likely to suffer from depression, from back problems, from problems with their arms, 3 times as likely to suffer in problems in their legs and feet, 3 times as likely to be deaf, 5 times as likely to be blind. They're 13% less likely to be employed when they return. The repercussions of war are felt long after the firing ceases. Pray for those who live with the scars, as well as for those who were killed. But what do we, as Christians, speak into this situation? We speak love. Love and support for those who are mourning, those whose lives have been shattered, for the millions of ex-service personnel who are still suffering from their experiences. We speak love, the love that seeks reconciliation between those at enmity, the love that seeks to end hostility and heal the wounds of hatred. Our Saviour Christ says, no one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. That statement is the very antithesis of war. In war, one does not attempt to lay down one's life for one's friends, but rather one attempts to make the enemy lay down their life for their friends. But Jesus here is foreshadowing what he knows to be coming, that he will willingly go to the cross. The same man who could have called down armies of angels instead accepts a criminal's death for his friends, the disciples, and for his friends, us. In 1911, the churches realized that tensions were rising, and they set up groups for peace, which tragically were not enough to stave off calamitous war. What are we, who are instructed to be peacemakers, called to do today? To listen carefully to those who have been to war and the narratives that they have to tell. To not fall into the trap of thinking that war is another person's problem in another place. And to build bonds of friendship and love, especially among those about whom our nation harbours suspicion and dislike. We are called to love one another, firmly founded in the example of God's own love for us. Amen.